A 50-year-old director finally hits the number he's been chasing for decades, $1 million in his 401k. On paper, he's won the game. He's achieved what the financial brochures call the gold standard. But it's 3 a.m., and instead of sleeping soundly, he's staring at the ceiling in the dark. He isn't thinking about early retirement, European cruises, or buying a boat. He's calculating the rising cost of a hospital stay, the creeping property taxes on a home he thought he'd own outright, and wondering if inflation is going to eat his hard-earned million before he even hits his 60s. But that's the weird thing about money today. You can hit the milestone and still feel like you're losing. That 7-figure milestone suddenly feels like it's missing a few zeros when you look at the world outside. Back in the year 2000, $1 million was a massive fortune. It was a figure that promised a lifestyle of absolute autonomy for decades. Today, that same amount of money buys significantly less. Healthcare costs are skyrocketing. And $1 today. It has about half the horsepower it had 20 years ago. That $1 million cushion feels more like a thin yoga mat on a concrete floor. It leaves a hollow gap in your financial security that a standard spreadsheet can't seem to fix. I remember the night I crossed my first major 6-figure milestone. In the movies, that's the moment you pop the champagne, call your friends, and celebrate your hard work. For me, it was a moment of cold sweat. I sat at my desk, recalculated my real-world purchasing power against the actual cost of living in a high-inflation environment, and realized I was still nowhere near the safety I had imagined. The number was there, but the feeling of security was missing. Most of us are conditioned to chase spreadsheet wealth, a static number that looks good during an annual review or on a quarterly statement. But there is a life-altering difference between being rich on an Excel file and having true freedom in your mind. Spreadsheet wealth is fragile. It depends on things going perfectly. True freedom, however, is resilient. If you don't solve this feeling now, this gap between the math and the reality, you'll find yourself tethered to a desk until you're 65, regardless of how much you've managed to save. The traditional math we've been taught about retirement, the 4% rule, the 8% growth projections, is quietly failing us. It's time to move past the illusions and ask the question that actually matters. When is the exact moment you can finally take your hands off the keyboard, walk away, and know for a fact that you're safe? Think of your financial life like pushing a massive boulder up a steep, unforgiving hill. For the first decade or two, every single inch of progress is pure muscle. You sweat, you strain, and you feel every ounce of that weight. If you stop for even a day, you feel like the whole thing might roll back and crush everything you've worked for. But there is a point on that hill where the grade starts to level out. You give the boulder one final, heavy nudge, and suddenly, the physics of the situation change. The boulder begins to move on its own. You're no longer the engine, you've become the observer. In finance, we call this the crossover point. It is the most significant milestone in your journey because it represents the official transfer of power. From your human power to your money power. It's the moment the dividends and capital gains from your investments start producing more wealth than the actual dollars you're scraping together from your paycheck. Let's run the math on this. It's easier to see with a real example. Suppose you're putting away $20,000 a year into your retirement accounts. Early on, when your balance is around $100,000, a solid 7% return earns you about $7,000. At this stage, you're still the one carrying the team. Your $20,000 contribution is nearly 3 times larger than what the market is giving you. Does that feel familiar? That feeling that you're the only thing keeping the lights on. If you were to stop now, you'd be making a massive trade-off, likely adding 15 more years of work, before you could even think about retiring. But look at what happens when that balance reaches $500,000. At that same 7% return, your portfolio is now generating $35,000 in a single year. This is the crossover. Your money is now working significantly harder than you are. The $35,000 market paycheck has officially surpassed your $20,000 labor paycheck. I remember the first time I saw this in my own accounts. I opened a year-end statement, looked at the growth column, and realized that my portfolio had earned more than the total amount of money I had spent 12 months of my life working for. It's an incredible, almost surreal feeling. It's the moment you realize that the machine you've been building is finally functional. It doesn't need you to feed it every waking hour anymore. This is the moment you finally buy back your options. The math shows that if you reach this $500,000 mark and decided to never contribute another penny, you would only reach your final retirement goal about 2 or 3 years later than if you had kept grinding away at the same pace. For most people in the middle of a high-pressure career, trading those last few years for decades of freedom today is an easy choice. This is the foundation of the Coast Fiery movement. The theory is simple. Once you hit this crossover point, you've won the long-term game. You can quit the corporate rat race, take a lower-paying job that you actually enjoy, and just earn enough to cover your rent and groceries. You let the portfolio coast in the background until you're ready to fully stop working. It sounds like the ultimate escape hatch. It's logical, it's mathematically sound, and it offers a light at the end of the tunnel for anyone feeling burnt out. But there's a catch. For those of us in our 40s and 50s, this is exactly where a hidden trap is waiting to snap shut. But for most of us in our 50s, there's a reason we still have that persistent knot in our stomach, regardless of what the portfolio says. It's because standard retirement math often operates in a vacuum, a clean, sterile environment that doesn't exist in your driveway, at your local pharmacy, or in the aisles of your grocery store. To truly step away from the grind without a lingering sense of fear, you have to look past the sticker price of your portfolio and find your real-world crossover point. This isn't just a different number, it's a different philosophy. This is your math stress tested against the 3 things that actually break retirement plans: inflation, taxes, and the risk of a market downturn right when you stop contributing. Standard models assume a smooth ride, but reality is often jagged. I've seen this play out with a couple in their early 50s who believed the standard Excel formulas were their ticket to freedom. They reached $800,000 and, following the popular 8% growth rule, they decided it was time to transition into a slower, part-time life. But the very next year, the stock market dropped 15%. At the same time, medical inflation, which operates on its own brutal logic, spiked by 5%. Because their compounding machine wasn't yet large enough to absorb those simultaneous hits, they had to start withdrawing funds from a shrinking pile of capital. That machine was effectively gutted before it ever truly took flight. Wall Street often uses what I call the identity protection line to keep you napping. They want you to focus on a nominal 8% growth rate because it's an attractive, round number that keeps you feeding the system. But real-world math is much colder. To find your true safety, you have to calculate your real return. If you take a projected 7% return and subtract 3% for general inflation and another 1% for the specific inflation tax of healthcare, your real-world growth is closer to 3% or 4%. Relying on that perfect 8% begins to look like a dangerous gamble with your future. I'll admit, I used to be the person building those rose-colored Excel files. I'd project 8% returns out for 30 years and feel like a genius. Then I realized I was being incredibly naive. I had completely ignored a silent shareholder who takes a cut of every single dollar I earn, the IRS, working in tandem with the relentless erosion of inflation. It really comes down to one choice. Do you want a plan that only works when things are perfect, or one that works when life gets messy? The first path relies on a market that never dips significantly and inflation that stays quiet and predictable. Choosing the second path might mean accepting the trade-off of working 1 or 2 more years to build a true margin of safety. But in exchange, you buy a lifetime of actual sleep. It's the difference between hoping things go right and knowing you're okay even when they go wrong. When people first see this reality, the reaction is often panic. You feel like the goalposts have moved just as you thought you were reaching them. But for those in the 45 to 55-year-old bracket, you aren't out of time. You haven't failed. You just need a different set of tools than the ones being sold to 30-year-olds. You need a strategy that understands the specific leverage of your current age. When you realize you haven't quite hit that bulletproof, real-world number yet, the natural instinct, especially for the high-achieving Gen X cohort, is to double down on the grind. You think if you just grip the steering wheel tighter and work more hours, you can bridge the gap. But there is a more strategic way to handle this phase of life. Instead of aiming for a standard Coast FI-RE, where you essentially stop contributing and hope for the best, I recommend looking at a framework I call Pivot FI. This is about using the momentum of your real-world crossover point to change the nature of your work immediately, rather than waiting for a distant, perfect retirement date that might always feel like it's 10 years away. Take Tom, for example. At 48, he ran the math we've been discussing, stripping away the 8% growth fantasies and accounting for real inflation, and realized he was about $150,000 short of his true safety margin. Most people in that position would either spiral into a panic or resign themselves to another 15 years of a high-stress corporate role that is already causing significant physical and mental burnout. Tom didn't do that. He looked at his leverage as a mid-career professional with decades of specialized knowledge and planned a pivot. The key to this strategy is a specific mathematical superpower that belongs exclusively to people in their 50s. The IRS catch-up contribution. If you are 50 or older, the tax code literally allows you to shove thousands of extra dollars into your 401k and IRA every single year beyond the standard limits. It is like a legal turbo button the government gives you for starting late, a mechanism designed to help people close the gap quickly that a 30-year-old simply isn't allowed to use, no matter how much they earn. Consider the trade-off Tom faced. He could stay in his current corporate meat grinder for another 15 years to ensure he never ran out of money, a path that almost guaranteed he'd be exhausted and bitter by the time he reached the finish line. Or he could commit to a high-intensity push for just 3 more years, using every cent of those catch-up limits and his peak earning years to bridge that $150,000 gap. Once that gap is closed, he can pivot into a consulting role or an advisory position, work that is often more meaningful and far less demanding on his time. In this scenario, his invested money continues to grow on its own in the background because he has reached that real-world crossover point. His quality of life changes the moment he makes the pivot, not a decade later. He only needs his new, lower-stress income to cover his daily expenses while his portfolio handles the long-term wealth building. Taking back the steering wheel is about reclaiming the right to own your most productive years. Napping or coasting isn't the goal, agency is. The math for Pivot FI is the easy part. You can settle the numbers in a weekend. But once the IRS rules are leveraged and the calculations are done, you are left facing the final, most difficult barrier, the psychology of your own inertia and the fear of letting go. Remember that 50-year-old director we started with? He's sleeping through the night now. It's not because the stock market suddenly became less volatile or because inflation magically vanished. He's sleeping because he finally knows exactly where his margin of safety sits. He stopped chasing a phantom number on a screen and started trusting a formula that accounts for the messy, unpredictable real world. The hardest part of this transition isn't actually the math, it's the psychology of it. We spend decades tying our entire identity to our ability to produce an income. It's hard to let go when that title has been your North Star for 30 years. I get that. I've noticed that many of the wealthiest people continue to work long past their crossover point because they're simply moving forward on pure inertia. Don't let that inertia decide how your life story ends. Even with my spreadsheets, I still check the headlines sometimes and feel that old flicker of doubt. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you if the market will crash next year or if inflation will hit another peak. But I do know that a conservative, reality-based calculation will never betray you. It provides the only thing money is actually meant to buy: the quiet confidence that you are going to be okay, regardless of what the headlines say. So, where are you on this path right now? Are you still in the early stages, straining to push that first $100,000 boulder up the hill? Or have you already passed the crossover point, but haven't found the courage to stop yet? Share your target number in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you found this helpful, subscribe so you don't miss the next set of strategies. I'll see you then.